Moeds this evening will be speaking to us about the Jasmine Revolution, and the title of his seminar is An Arab Spring or Just a Tunisian Exception. Moez Majed will be reading at the festival, mainly on Friday, 28th August. He was born in Tunis on the 16th of June 1973 and is the son of the poet and intellectual Jafar Majed, who is a very well-known intellectual in Tunisia. He studied biology at the Faculty of Sciences of Tunis, obtaining a DEA in 1998. He then moved to France, and after a stint at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, he pursued his studies, obtaining in 2000 a master's degree in management from the École Centrale in Lille. Moez Majed's literary career began in 1997 with the publication of his first collection of poems entitled L'Ombre, La Lumière, published by Éditions Arabesques in Tunis. It was after the publication of his second collection, Les Rêveries d'une Cerisienne Fleur, in 2008, that he became an established poet. September 2010 saw the publication of his third book, L'Ambition d'un Verger, published by L'Harmattan in Paris with a preface by Patrick Voisin. In 2011, Moeds won the Paul Verlaine Poetry Contest with special mention for free verse. Gisons, his fourth poetry collection, was published by Fata Morgana in 2012. In 2014, Fata Morgana also published his fifth book entitled Chant de l'autre rive. Following the death of his father on 14 December 2009, Moeds took over the publishing business that Jafar Majed had started back in 1994. In 2011, he founded a monthly news magazine entitled Opinion, of which there are copies that we're going to circulate for your perusal during the seminar. And Opinion magazine very quickly established itself as a publication that voiced a diversity of opinions, especially after October 2011 when An-Nahda party took over the Tunisian government. And Opinion acted, in a sense, as a counterbalance to the Nahda, to the Islamist politics, and it managed to rope together those opinions standing in the unacknowledged corners of Tunisia, as it were. It's a very successful magazine that sold out across North Africa and Paris. Okay, I should hand over to Moeds, who also, I have to remind you, lived the Tunisian uprisings in 2011 firsthand, and therefore he will not only be making arguments here, but sharing his very direct firsthand experience of the revolutions, both as a poet and as an intellectual. Over to you, Moeds.
Thank you. No, I have. Thank you very much, Norbert, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me here, and thank you for being here in such a large audience. First of all, I would like to apologize for my English, which is not very precise, not as precise as I would like. And, as my Arabic would be, or my French. But anyway, I think I can explain myself normally. Well, when Norbert asked me to talk about the situation in Tunisia, I was not really very comfortable with the idea to come to just to say what happened and maybe to share with you personal opinions and political positions. This is not the topic, I think, and this is not very clever and not very honest. What I would like to do so here is just give you what happened, talk to you about what happened in Tunisia from 2010 until today, putting in the situation, in the context of the country. As I know that the audience here maybe are not very familiar with the Tunisian history, I'm going to introduce first a quick run of the modern history of Tunisia, notable highlights that could help you to understand what is happening, what happened, and why it happened. So my speech will be in three parts. The first will be the history and the context. The second part will be the facts, just the facts as it happened. And the third, maybe, was most important for me, share with you some ideas. And here it's personal items and personal lecture of the situation of what happened. So let's start with the history. And I would like just to say that Tunisia showed a movement of reforms, of renewals, that started in the 19th century. Probably, first of all, with this king of Tunisia, Ahmed Bey, king of Tunisia from 1837 to 55, who has decided the abolition of slavery in Tunisia in 1846, a long time before France and the United States. And he liberated all the slaves present in the Kingdom of Tunisia, which is enhancing important political reforms into this country of North Africa, which is an exception, real exception in the Arabic world that time. In 1857, it has been established the first constitution established in the Arabic world. And it has been promulgated by the following king of Tunisia. And this constitution guarantees equality between all the subjects of Tunisia and regarding the religion, the origins, Jewish, Maltese, Italians, Muslims, and the freedom to practice their religion as they like. The political reforms continue in 1875 with the foundation, no, before this, I think. Yeah, with the foundation of the Sadiki school, which is the first non-religious school in the Arabic world and in Tunisia, 1875, and it formed part of the Tunisian elite that took part lately to freeing the company, to freeing the country from the French occupation. In 1920, it has been established the first political party in Tunis, the Destour Party, by Abdelaziz Thalbi, here in the photo. And in 1924, the Communist Party of Tunisia has been founded. And 1934, the New Destour Party. This is just to say that in this country, from beginning from the 19th century until the beginning of the 20s, there have been real movements of reforming the political institutions. Not always very successful, but at least it has been enhanced, and people started to think by a different way that that is done in the Arabic world and the Islamic world at that time. There's, in addition to these political reforms, that have been a quite deep reform in the way of thinking that had been enhanced by Tahir bin Ashur, which is a religious, actually, this guy. He initiated a new way to understand the Arabic and Islamic behavior by establishing a new concept, a new approach, which is actually the intentionalist approach to read the holy texts, which is intellectually a revolution, because it is in total opposition with the rigorous lecture of the holy texts. Today, if you are talking about ISIS, about Wahhabism, about Salafism, these guys say that they want to apply the text exactly as it is written, and it has been applied 1,400 years ago. And they consider that any interpretation and any freedom we can take with the reading of this text is heretical. This way of thinking is different. Tahir bin Ashur considers that if the texts are forbidding something. It's to avoid a bad thing that would happen if you do it. So if you understand what's the meaning of this to forbid something, and you can avoid to reach this state, the thing object of the interdiction is then could be done without being a sin. That means, example, but he never said what I'm going to say, but this is this is a way of thinking. How could it go to? If it is there's an interdiction to drink wine or alcohol in Islam, is to avoid to be drunk and all the bad consequences that could happen. If you understand this and you say, okay, if I'm not going to be drunk, and if I make to be sure to not to be drunk, so maybe a glass of wine is possible. He never said that. let me be sure. Never say that. But I know with his grandson that, not him, but his son, Father Ben Ashur, his son, makes his whiskey at home every night. I know that. His daughter said. But he never took this position publicly. But his way of thinking could go until this. And the idea is revolutionary, but because if you read the text by thinking on it, you could adapt, you could reach modernity without going outside your identity or your religion. And this is in total opposition of what the thesis of the rigorists. But something that told these guys that if in Islam 4 wives are possible, there was a reason for, because, and now I'm citing him, because in the early ages of Islam, it was a small community attacked by different tribes. And there's a lot of guys who died in the wars. And every time when they come back, there's always some women that are losing their husbands in the battles. And who is going to protect them and to feed them tomorrow? So it is so the Prophet encouraged his the guys around him to marry the women that lost their and the Prophet himself did it. And this is one of the explanation of the situation. The second one is as it is a small community and attacked, having 4 wives could enable to a bigger growth of the community and to protect it. And as this situation is today no longer valid, so having 4 wives is today anachronic and not adapted to our modern life. This is exactly the thesis that have been developed by the intentionalist reading of the holy texts. And this way of thinking enabled to this guy, Tahar Haddad, which is a sheikh, actually, Tahar Haddad. He studied in the Zaytuna Mosque, and he theorized the liberalization of the Muslim woman. He wrote in 1930 a book called Imra'atuna fi al-Shari'ati wal-Mujtama', where he considers that today, starting from the holy texts themselves, the Quran and the Hadith, we can say there is no objection for women to be educated, to go to school, to work, and to have a social life. There is no interdiction, no clear interdiction, and he gives the arguments, the religious arguments for that. So the second part of the reform atmosphere that happened in Tunisia in the 90s and the beginning of the 80s. The third thing important to have in mind is that this country is a very, how to say that, very fan of unions. I mean, workers' unions. So in 1912, it had been a first strike, actually. It says le boycott du tramway de Tunis. The Tunisians consider that the tramway company French company is not fair with the Muslim community. They decided to no longer take the tramway, and it was a big struggle with the French there. So this is the first manifestation of the syndicalism in Tunisia. So after that, the first union worker founded I say in Tunisia, but I think it's an Arabic word, but I'm not sure. So that's why I say just in Tunisia, in 1925, by Mohammed Ali al-Hammi. And later, Farhat Hashed founded the United Workers' Union in Tunisia in 1946, and he was assassinated by the French militia in 1952. So, and later this union have enhanced some strikes later in 1984, for example, 78 and 84, this is, for example, the protest against the sudden doubling of the bread prices in 84. So this population is concerned with the public things. And during the last century, it knew a lot of actions of manifestation of modernity, temptation of modernity, with the political reforms, intellectual and philosophical reforms concerning the lecture of the holy texts, and here le syndicalisme. I don't know how to say it in English. The union. Well, so this is the history. From 1956 to 1987, it was the construction of the modern state of Tunisia after the independence under the area of Habib Bourguiba, the first president, who enhanced it in 1956 a law called Code du statut personnel. And this law actually goes to practice the theories of Tahar Haddad that I told you about earlier. And today, Tunisia is the only Muslim country where polygamy is prohibited. If you have two wives, to go to jail for 5 years. So there's nowhere anywhere in the Arabic world where there's a law, equivalent law. Interdiction of the repudiation. Repudiation in English is the repudiation. To divorce. To repudiate his wife, which is in the text, actually, in the Sharia, it is possible to divorce by saying just one word, actually. Which is, today, in Tunisia, it doesn't work like that today. You have to go to court, and it costs very expensive. No more 2 wives. 5 years of jail if you have it. Yeah, maybe, but no. Yeah. That's it. So Bourguiba enhanced also the education, free and obligatory education for the whole population, boys and girls. A quite correct health politics and social insurance. Not really perfect, but quite correct. But Bourguiba has failed in something important. He still considered himself as the father of the nation and had a paternalist governance. And this made him go progressively into considering himself the president during his whole life and unfortunately he lived very long. So in 87 there was a coup, and his prime minister, this guy Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali, came to power. With in 1987 with a military coup. And this period, I call it the dictatorship and nepotism under Ben Ali, which is, to be honest, we have to say that it wasn't only bad things during this period, because actually Ben Ali enhanced the liberalization of the economy and very big infrastructure projects, quite successful, and had something like 5% growth of the economy during 23 years. So this is the nice part of the area. The problem is when you say big projects and 5% growth 23 years, you say a lot of money and then a lot of corruption. And during this period, the Ben Ali and his family became one of the richest persons in the world, actually in Africa. His personal assets reached something like 5 billion during this period at the end. But nobody could really, but I think some serious studies can establish it something around 5 billion. And but the problem is during this period he had an état policier, how you say it, a police state, practicing torture, controlling media, and putting to jail all the opposites. It was possible to maintain the country under this situation during 23 years, but actually, and now I pass to the second part of my presentation, which are the facts. In December 17th, Mohamed Bouazizi, which is a guy I think 25 years old, who's fruit seller in Sidi Bouzid, the market of Sidi Bouzid, saw his wife confiscated by the police, and he has no other possibility to live without selling his fruit. So he took gasoline and burned himself in front of the governor's building. And from December 17th to January 14th, it was what we can call actually a popular appraisal in the whole country. So here I have some images of the situation every day during all this month, where people were going out every day and seeking for three things: شغل, work, حرية, كرامة وطنية, work, freedom, and dignity. This is what they want. And dignity, which is a very heavy word, because this guy who burned himself, because he's looking for dignity to live. This is the weight of this word. And the most important day, one of the most important days, was 14 January, which these photos are 14th January, where the population went out in front of the Dakhiliya, the Ministry of Interiors, which is the headquarters of the police of Ben Ali, where they torture people, where they capture opponents, and stand just in front at 3 meters and start saying in one word in French, dégage. And it's funny because when we are saying dégage, it became like a song, actually. It's dégage, dégage, dégage. And you can see just in a few meters, you have the policemen that are just standing in front of you not to let you go. But people didn't try to enter, actually. They just say dégage. And you have the policeman just in front, at 1 meter from the first line. And they were not hitting nobody, just standing to avoid people to enter inside. And people saying dégage, dégage, like waves, you see? Like come, dégage, dégage, dégage. And in 1-2 minutes, you have the first line of policemen that start crying. They go back, and there's the second one that starts. Like 2-3 minutes, they go back, there's another one. And this moment, I understood really that this guy is finished. Because it's so strong to see this policeman, which is the guy who is in the police. He's one of these guys. He could have his own cousin or his brother just on the other side. And actually, this is when people are screaming dégage, you see, like that. And it was really very emoting moment. At that moment, we didn't know exactly what happened, but later, and with this magazine, we started to have informers later there. We knew that at that moment there was snipers in the buildings outside, and all around, which is a corps of the police, of state police actually, and they received the order to shoot. They received the order to shoot, but they refused to execute the order. And we never knew that because they didn't show that. But later, there was a dark guy that has been shot one day before, going to the cemetery that came through Habib Bourguiba, and then it enhanced some troubles, and the police has dispersed everybody this moment. But they didn't shoot directly. The sniper did not shoot that. And in this same day, at 5 o'clock, Ben Ali left the country. He left the country because he has, at that moment, he understood that he does not control the country, and his own police is not executing his orders. So, of course, it's finished. Of course, there's some foreign interventions that are strongly suggested to him to leave, and he did. And probably, yeah. No, without. He didn't have the time. Somebody told me who was working with him inside his palace in Carthage, that he left his glasses on his office, which is quite funny actually. So that's so fast. Yeah, he left his his own glasses. He left it in the. Yeah, and his personal guard when he went, because he didn't. When he left, he wasn't. He was going to just put his family on the plane, and he was planning to come back to his office. That's why he left his glasses. And when he was in front of the plane, his own guard told him, "Go ahead. We cannot protect you." And he pushed him into the plane, and that's why. So, it's, well, this are some inside the news that people who live there know now today. But at that moment, we did not know all these details, actually. Well, Ben Ali left, and there was a choice to do. And the Tunisian people did not decide to broke the whole state, to enter into the monasteries, to burn the papers, like you can see it in Libya, for example, or in other countries, in other revolutions. They said, okay, he went, now let's try to find a way of governance for the moment. So they kept the administration working, they kept the police working. This same police who was shooting them a few weeks ago with Ben Ali. And because we need an administration to work, and we need, and 2 weeks later, the salaries were in the bank accounts of everybody, of the administration. The system continued to work, even the head was cut, but the body continued to function. And then the choice was to, what is the governance? And the Tunisians choose to put, how to say, a government of interim, yes, and of transition, and without being corrupted with Ben Ali. They never worked with Ben Ali before. So people from they took people from the university in each specialties, so economists, syndicalists, etc. So they put people in the ministry. Okay, you administrate the country for the moment. We'll try to find a solution how to find a way of governance. No, it wasn't a democratic way. It's technocratic, exactly. And it was a consensus about that. And actually, this photo of the guy, he's the president of the institution that make the country functioning. This and it's called the Institution Ben Achour. Actually, this guy is Ben Achour. He's the president of the institution because the name of this institution is too long, and nobody could know it exactly. So we call it Institution Ben Achour, and it was like a parliament, but not elected for the moment, just like as well as opposants, universitaires, I think, people anyway. Yeah, different factions of the population. Yeah, actually, yeah. By the way, this guy is the grandson of Ben Achour, the guy who invented this, the intentionalist way to act. Well, now the bad news. Yeah, actually, during 9 months, they are their real faces. This is not a Photoshop. Actually, during 9 months, we tried to find a way to make an election, etc. And the election happened in October 2011. During this period, before this election, the Islamists came back from London, where they were, and from France, and started to prepare the election, and going with their arguments, political arguments, religious arguments. And they were by far the most organized party in the country, because all the other parties did not exist, were just created after the Ben Ali left. So they are not organized. They do not have bases. They do not have, money to start a campaign. But the Islamists do, because they are here from a long time ago, and they won the elections. Yeah, they won the election. It was a very bad day, but actually they won. When we say they won it at 38%. 38%. And they had deputies in the parliaments. But 38%, that means that 62 do not like them. But the problem is the progressist part of the population is divided on, I think it was something like 120 parties, fragmented. So if you take the the progressist parties you will find 1.2, 1.3, 4.5, 9 at least. They had 38, by far the first. And they had 89 deputies on 217. So it's not really a majority. And they formed made an alliance with two left-wing parties that sold the battle with them, CPR and Takatul.
Are they connected with ISIS too?
No. These guys it's actually there's difference between Islamism and ISIS. ISIS is a very specific part of the doctrine of Islamism. Islamism is, it's an ideology enhanced in Egypt in the 20s, 1926 by Hassan al-Banna, who considers that the renewal of the Islamic world could come only by Islam. Okay, way of thinking. Okay. And this means that if you want to have an ethical governance, you have to apply the Sharia and to administrate the country. Okay, way of thinking. Okay, but Islamism goes from these guys, a part of these guys. Okay, a part of these guys who are Islamists, but you can consider them as potentially Democrats. Okay, they think that you have to apply Islam to administrate the country, but they are not killers. They are not. They're just. This is what they like. If you say chrétien démocrate en Allemagne, there's a part of this, but inside them there's other people who are more radicalized. And ISIS or Ansar Sharia or all these groups of Salafism, jihadism, this is like a Ku Klux Klan inside there. You know, if you can say that Ku Klux Klan represents all Christians, this is just a violent fraction of this ideology. Ideology pushed to the extreme until believing to impose the Sharia by the weapons. Okay. But this is not our subject, just a parenthèse. So they won. The problem is, this election was a very important one because it was not just an election for a parliament, it was an election to write a constitution. So we had a pretty problem because these guys are going to write the constitution. And they were really planning to write an Islamic constitution. And during this period, there was a real struggle between the political class, which is Islamists, and their allies, the left-wing allies, which we call them the Troika, and the intellectuals of Tunisia. The intellectual, the university. I mean, my friend, I'll send you his contacts. Habib Kazdarli, for example, Habib Kazdarli, and his struggle in the University of Tunis to maintain the university not under control of the Islamists and secularized. This guy, who was a communist, and he has been killed by an Islamist militia on February 6th in 2013. The intellectuals, the writers, my position actually was to create Opinion magazine during this period. And for example, the first front page we had after the election of another one, this one, it's a numéro sur le vin, the wine. The wine and its importance in Tunisia. So such positions and such arguments to try to say that they have the control of the parliament, but the society is still alive. I mean, we don't agree, and you have only 38%. With 30%, you cannot engage the whole country for the 50 coming years with an Islamist constitution. So you have to deal with us. And first of all, they say, no, we don't deal with us. We are elected. We do what we want. And it was a real struggle, at probably the most tough period. Mohammed Brahmi was a guy, the left wing as well, that has been assassinated by the same militia in July 2013. His assassination was really a turning point, actually, in the situation, because after that, during 1 month, it was a general strike in Tunisia during all the month of July and August. And every night we go, it was Ramadan, and after the eating, we used to go out in front of the parliament and asking them to leave, because they, after these 2 assassinations, it's obvious that they cannot administrate the country. If we are reaching this point, that means that you cannot administrate the country. And so what happened then, and I have to say that Nahda, I mean the Islamists, have been quite clever and quite, how to say it, fair play, because they accepted to resign without an election. They accepted to resign under the pressure of the intellectuals and the street. They accepted to resign and to leave the government for another technocratic government. And they accepted to the consensus around the constitutions. And the constitution that has been voted here is today the most, certainly, the most progressist constitution in the Arab world. I think it's a constitution that guarantees freedom of freedom of thinking, changing religions, which is absolutely impossible in the Islamic world, homosexuality, things like that. Yeah, accepted, because liberté de conscience, c'est la liberté de conscience, freedom of conscience, which is something very heavy. So this.
It's now actually like that.
Yeah, and this has been voted by the Islamists under the pressure of the street.
What happened after the bomb attacks?
No, we are not yet to the bomb attack. Not yet. Coming there. Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit long, but there's too many things to say. Well, after that, in November 2014 was the second election. And then the progressists understood the lesson, and they grouped their forces into one party. I'm not sure it is really the ideal party, but anyway, it exists. Nida Tunis, and the progressists won the election of 2011, parliament election and presidential election. We elected a president that is aged 89 years. Okay, but anyway, it's yeah. But what I've said once, at least we know that he will not make it once again. At least we are sure he's leaving after that. At least we are sure he's leaving. Yeah. So. Which is what very moving, actually, this moment. And another one, once again, the Islamists were really fair play. They accepted the results. They accepted to go to opposition. They're not exactly opposition, but anyway, they're kind of a position. And today they are working to prepare the next election. Okay, I have nothing to say about that.
They have still a seat in the chamber?
Sorry?
Do they have still a seat in the chambers?
Yeah, 60. 60 seats. Normal. 25% of population vote for them. Normal. And here I'm coming to my third part. of the presentation, which is how to read all this. These were the facts, just the facts. But, well, the first conclusion, and this is personal conclusion, but anyway, I think I can share it with you. There is in this southern country something that is the failure of post-colonialism. Post-colonialism failed in the Arabic countries. Succeeded in Korea, in Malta, anyway, but it failed in the Arabic countries. It failed because the first governors of these countries chose paternalism as governors. We see Nasser, Bourguiba, Hassan Thani, Hassan II in Morocco, so all this paternalism, considering the people as child who don't know what they want or what is good for them. I know what's good for you. And to maintain their power, they violate human rights. So there's no human rights. You can be tortured, captured, disappear during all these years. Controlling the media. Of course, when you have all this on your hand, temptation is big for nepotism and corruption. And generally, but not in Tunisia, I have to say here, the education and the social system are quite inexistent or maybe primitive. And they keep their people in the ignorance not to contest them. But it wasn't the case in Tunisia. It was not the case because Bourguiba did that for them. And unfair distribution of the wealth of the country. It is typical of the Arab countries. And a cultural politic which is controlled by the power. This is the manifestation of failure of colonialism. And this makes this country needing to uprise, to try to find another way to be governed. The second idea is, when I'm coming back to Ben Ashur now, is there a modernity possible in the Arabo-Islamic behavior? Which is a question. I consider this question as very pernicious in French. How is it? Pernicious. Because asking this question refers that there is an inferiority in this behavior, and these people are not able to administrate themselves by themselves, which is, of course, according to me, totally unfair and not true. And I consider that reforming the way of thinking of the Islamic behavior, and what did Tahir Ben Ashur in the 90s, is the first step for answering this, that makes it possible. Before that, we go more far than just the text itself. Just try to understand why, and try to adapt it to my situation today, 400 years later. I'm not obliged to apply it as it was applied in the Arabic island in the 7th century. It makes no sense. But anyway, I don't need to make a negation of my identity, of my religion, to leave modernity. This is a very important point to go inside. If you come to the Tunisian people who say, if you have to choose between modernity and Islam, they will choose Islam. But if you find a way to leave their modernity inside their religion and their identity, they will follow you. And this, today, what is happening is a real struggle between these two ways of thinking. Reforming the Islamic thought against the Wahhabism that comes from Saudi Arabia. And today, our way to live our behavior and to live our identity as Arab and Muslims, which was enhanced, as I explained to you in the beginning here, by these thinkers, Tunisian thinkers, and Egyptians, some of the Egyptians as well. This is in a big conflict with the Wahhabism and the Salafism that comes from Saudi Arabia. The problem is that they have the money. They have the money. They have Al Jazeera. They have the influence. And
they have the prophets.
yeah, they have the prophets. Yeah, those legacies. And today they are going to promote their way of thinking against the hour.
Definitely because they want to invest in their countries.
No, they don't want. They care. You know, our country. You know, Tunisia. It's whole Tunisia. It's $20 billion a year of PIB. It's nothing for them. It's nothing. They could have more by gambling in the bourse of New York in 2 days. 2 days. They don't. The problem for them is what we did in Tunisia is very dangerous for them. If we can prove that you can be democratic and Muslim and Arabic and kick out your dictator and still alive and live in peace and to get, if it's possible, so it's possible for them too. So the risk is not to invest in our country. They don't care about that. The risk is they are risking to lose their own country. So what are they going to say is the Tunisian experience must fail. To give a contre-exemple. How to say Norbert contre-exemple? Contre-exemple. Yeah. This is, and when you talk about the attacks, today, these terrorist organizations, from where do they have the money? How are they organized? If you take these guys, no, they have it from not only Saudi, but Saudi, Qatar, etc. They are financing them. They are financing them, not because they agree with them and we're thinking. No, they are using them to
keep the tide away.
Yeah, to say, you see, they did it, and today they are in shit. So you have to keep your dictator, guys. Yeah. And so today, if you got these guys that make Bardo went to Libya to train, and came back, and the more weapon, who paid the weapon? Who paid the logistics? Who paid if you try to track it, you find the money coming from associations, Islamic associations in Qatar or in Jeddah or in Riyadh or somewhere else. I'm passing through that. They are. This is the link. We are a counterexample, and this is much more dangerous for them than being a lovely country that becomes democratic. It's bullshit. They don't care about that. It's not a problem. The problem is this country is Arabic and Muslim, and this makes a big problem. Yeah, this makes a big problem.
In your argument of whether Islam is compatible with democracy, what is your position on women's head covering and hijab? Because I know
Ben Ashur, his own daughters don't cover their heads. He is sheikh. He is a sheikh. He is imam. And his own daughters do not cover. Because this is not a necessity. In our way of living today, because there is nothing in the text that clearly says you have to cover. Nothing, absolutely nothing. It is an interpretation. It is an interpretation.
At the same time, some women insist that even if they cover, they still feel that they are modern.
Okay, cover. Okay, they could cover. But today, if you see, there's no need. In the text, there is no need. في القرآن لا وجود لحديث في الحديث there's one hadith that says يضربون بخمارهن على جيودهن. Okay, it's not clear. What's خمارهن على جيودهن? It's not very clear. Yeah. Sorry?
That's moderately
modernity. That's
Yeah.
what it says.
Yeah, yeah. And today, this way of thinking, progressist, intentionalist, allows us to go far and to adapt our practice of our religion to our context. Too much? No. So?
I have a question.
Yeah, come on.
One of the many, and I want to get in
Yeah, come
before
on.
the,
Yeah, I
others-
have
the other
other
questions
things to say, but
come
I'll
running in.
say it.
No, one of your issues focuses on the Mediterranean. You have
Yeah.
Special Méditerranée.
Well,
And I'm curious about this because I know that during the discussions that were going on in society, in the run-up to the writing of the new constitution, etc., there was one mention, which Mohammed Salah Homri always mentions to me. There was one mention of the Mediterranean as one of the many identities of the
because,
Tunisians.
it's a debate. Because now I'm going through to it because what is the debate today? What's the debate? Because here I go to. I finish with the idea of the modernity. I go to the specificity of the political debate in such a country. Comment tu dis schisme politique? Rift, yeah. The political rift in Tunisia. Yeah. It is, there's, here in Malta, which we could consider as Occident actually, in Occident generally, the political rift is between right and left. Yeah, the divide from the left or right. Nationalism, labors, etc. In Tunisia, it doesn't make sense. Because this is not the point. The point is who we are. Okay, and the rift, as we say, is shall we exist as in traditionalism and concretely by applying the dogma of the Islamists, which is al-Islam huwa al-hal, the solution is Islam. So we have administrated the population referring only to Islam, so to the Sharia way of thinking. They are allowed to think that. Okay, they believe that. And the other is the progressists. And the progressists think, no, this is not, and here is the debate from Mohammed Salah Homri. This Islam is one of the constituents of our identity as Tunisian, but it's not the only one. The Barbarian as well, the Mediterranean as well, the Romans, the Phoenicians. You can, the African. We are all this at the same time. So this is the real debate in politics. So who we are? Are we just Arab and Muslim, or are we Arab Muslim but something else?
So you're challenging these
Yeah, and this is the sense.
Identity.
Yeah, this is the sense of the. That's why we put these ideas. We put why we introduce the identity of Mediterranean. We are Mediterranean as well. So this is debate that existed during 2 years. It was really tough. It was really tough to introduce this to the public debate. And in this same idea, la laïcité, I mean the secularism, does not make sense in our country. Because if you say laïcité, you will give a gift to the Islamists. They say, okay, they want to get out. Okay, we are Islam, they are not Islam. Laïcité, they are laïc. The finish, you lose. Definitely, you lose everything. Even your own voices, you lose. Even your cousin does not vote for you. Okay, that's true. That's the reality. So you have to find a way to coexist modernity and your identity. So this is a very important point. So when European comes there, we are for the laicity in Tunisia. Shut up, guy. What are you going to do? This is not the point. And they do not understand the specificity of the country. Another point, just I have to, to say, sorry, I'm really long, but was it really a revolution? It's, one point. At the beginning, sure, it was an appraisal. Okay, just an appraisal, dignity, etc. People are sick from this guy, from this government, from this regime. And by kicking the dictator out, maybe it became something more than just an appraisal.
But was it spontaneous or not?
Yeah,
No,
first was spontaneous.
that's a
First, the first weeks were spontaneous. The last week was oriented. The,
first week.
the two first weeks were spontaneous.
Tunis.
The two first were not in Tunis. They were in the insiders. After when it came in Tunis, it's finished. It was oriented. But anyway, okay, if they kick out the dictator, let them orient it. Okay. So by kicking out the dictator, today we are free. It freed the speak, the expression, free the expression, which is something very important. It have permitted it emerged a new political class, really completely renewed. What are administrating today? Maybe some of them, maybe 10%, 50% are all were existing during Ben Ali, but 85% of the political class is renewed. And it has created a new intelligentsia in this country. A guy like me never could be existing in the Ben Ali system because it has his own intellectuals, it has its own guys, so it's very closed. When we analyze this now, maybe it's becoming a revolution now, 4 years later. In that sense, maybe now it's starting to become a revolution. And if you read it according to the reformalism, the reform of the way of thinking of the 19th, of Ben Ashur, of Tahir Haddad, of others, you can find similarity between other revolutions and this one. Because French Revolution had le siècle de lumière before, and the philosophical basis for that. And maybe we can see now with this, say, this happened because of this intellectual work that happened one century before is now coming into to concrete earth. See. And now, by this way of view, you can find that it has the characteristics potentially of potential revolution. The ideological basis, renewing totally, a country is being really going to be renewed. And hopefully it will continue to evolve in that sense, and maybe then it could be definitely a revolution. But I think it's going to become a revolution. It's very easy to call it Révolution du Jasmin from the first day. It was really naive. But now it's really becoming. And one of the things very important that made that the Islamists themselves now, they changed. They accepted the democratic game. They maybe even fréquentable. I mean, how acceptable even. Actually, to be honest, I have some friends between them. But yeah, okay, we don't agree. We agree on nothing. On est d'accord sur rien. Okay. Actually, it's not. C'est pas vrai. On est d'accord sur tout sauf sur l'essentiel. We agree on everything unless the essential. This is. Well, the conclusion for me, I'm sorry to hear, but there's no Arab Spring, guys. There's no Arab Springs. There's no Arab Spring. There's just a Tunisian exception, and quite fragile. That's it. Thank you. We're okay?
Okay, over to you now. We're opening the floor to any questions that you might want to raise, the Moeds.
Mu'taz, when we look at the whole scene, actually, this really confirms that there wasn't actually an Arab Spring. But my question is, by voting for both the president and the Nida party and the parliament, would that could be viewed as like sending a nostalgic message for Ben Ali's time or something, or just it was a way of kicking of Islamists?
Well, thank you. Now I have Walid, it is clear that the Nida party, the Progressive Party that won, is a recycling way of the party of Ben Ali. This is the truth. Nida Tunis, yes. Because actually the progressists, but you know, the top management of this party are militants of the left wing of the society, which is quite strange. Because what? Because there is, I mean, the concept of machine électorale, I mean, electoral machine. There's two machines electorales in Tunisia. The Islamists through the mosques. Okay? And the second one, heralded from the old party of Ben Ali. Shall we abandon it and say, idealistic, say, we will win? Or shall we capture this machine and try to make it work for change things?
And it can trace its roots back to Bourguiba as well.
Yeah, this is Destour. This is the Destour party, you know, that has been founded in 1934. This is true that this party is infested by old Parisian activists. This is true, but in lower level, okay? And they need us. They need him. They need them because they want them to make the work. They know how to go to reach the elector. And this is the difference between a guy like me, which is an intellectual. I don't want to touch the politics, but politics is dirty. And if you have to win the battle against the Nahda, Sipsi, which is the old guy, and the guys who decided to be pragmatic and to say, okay, they make it. They took the old party that we recycled it into Nida Tunis and worked with it, and they won. Today they are trying to pass a new law, which is a loi de réconciliation nationale, I mean law of national reconciliation, which will give to all the old actions, thieves, say, okay, we forgot everything.
Amnesty.
Yeah, amnesty. I'm not a politician. Ethically, I have a problem with that. But anyway, I can understand that in the way of view of the politician who must make the country work and go away, maybe he has his arguments. Not always very acceptable intellectually, but anyway, practicing politics is something compromising. So yeah, you are this is true. But you know what? With these guys of the odd party, it's the same. We agree with nothing with them unless the essential, who we are. At least this question, we have the same answer. And you can find with this in this party people that are communist, with people that are completely liberalist. They agree on nothing unless the essential, which is the identity. That's it.
Any other questions for Moez? Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, since it was a very important turning point, why did they suddenly decide to stop the Islamists from? I mean, they won the elections. There were 38%. Why all of a sudden they decided to give up?
Who decided to give up?
The Islamists. They decided to leave government. Yes.
Yes, this is a very important question. No, actually no. After the assassination, there was every night was a lot of people in the streets. General strike. The country was stopped, completely stopped. I think one night we were up to 1 million in the streets of Tunis. 1 million in the streets of Tunis. Tunis is 2.4 millions. 1 million in the street just in Tunis. One night, I remember that. But they didn't give up for that. You know what decided them to give up? What happened in Egypt. This is what happened in Egypt. After that, they decided to give up. Because they were understanding that if they maintain their government, they could have a coup. Yeah. And that's why they gave up. So the Egyptian, I'm sorry to say that, the Egyptian went back to dictatorship, but they saved us. Mm. Yeah. Okay. Sorry? Yeah. 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 But anyway, now what they have is exactly the same dictatorship they used to have before. Yeah.
And another thing, what do you think of the media in Tunisia? And do you think that the international media had a great influence in the uprising? And do you think it controlled the level and let's say, I don't say manage, but how did you see the national media and the international media from both, I'd say, Western countries and Eastern countries?
Well, I mean, the national media, the public media, are under the control of the government. But today, I can say that this is quite free to for in the editorial policy they have. The private media there's a big economic problems for the media today, because to have all these media need advertisement to live and to pay their costs, and they could be tempted to be friendly with the power to try to find some investment of public companies. But this is the problem anywhere in the world. The international media, people could all the journals, all the newspapers enter Tunisia normally. People have the satellites, and so can see what they want. But actually, today the Tunisians are less sensitive to the news because we have an overdose of news during all these 4 years. After the last election, personally, I stopped sometimes because it's really we have been overcovered by all the medias. Yeah, which is logic, yeah. But today the public opinion is much more difficult to control and to orient by the medias because they are less sensitive to this message and they doubt of everything, all the medias. They are sold Al Jazeera, we don't look at it, it's Qatar, France, we don't look at it, it's France, etc. So, okay, all right.
Well, does this give power to then religion, maybe? in that case,
No. So, I mean, even them, they are subject to.
So where do they find their sources? Where do they find?
Where do they find them? They're
Like,
very rich, guy.
I
They're
don't know,
very
but-
rich. Actually, they have been financed during the long time ago by the Eastern countries, Arab Saudi, Qatar, etc. But now certainly less. But now, as they are part of the power, they are financed by the businessmen who are living around them. So today, at that moment in Tunis, there's a big scandal concerning a businessman who is a Nahda deputy, who has created air transport company, and he is going to bankrupt now. And people are asking how has been protected by Nahda during this bankruptcy, etc. So, but they have an ecosystem of business guys who are turning around to have markets and to see. That's like Nida Tunis, let's say it. Today, Nida Tunis is financed by the business, the Tunisian businessman, because. No, tourists, there's no more. Yeah, that was, yeah. Yeah. There's some, but it's a particular case. Well, he's dead there. Yeah.
Regarding the new anti-terrorism law. The new anti-terrorism law. Is it that strict or not?
The anti-terrorism?
The new anti-terrorism law that they were debating, they were passing through Parliament after the terrorist attack.
The law.
The law.
Yeah. Well, it's to be honest, it's a liberticide law. It's a law that restricts liberty, freedom.
Yes.
But the law is something, and the spirit how to apply it is another thing. And you could have very good laws like in the United States and have Guantanamo, which is a shame in human rights point of view. And so I could not say I wasn't opposite to this law actually, even if I know it restricts freedom, because the situation is really dramatic.
But were the Islamists in favor or not?
Look, in Tunisia, during the period of Nahda, they allowed the radicalization of a part of the young people. And today we have more than 3,000 Tunisians fighting in Syria.
I saw a report that there were 12,000 members. 12,000.
No, 12,000. No, not Tunisian. No, Tunisia. Honestly,
it's the biggest contingent from any
it's
Arab
the
country.
biggest one. Yeah, that's true. 3,000, maybe 4, but 12. I don't believe. I sincerely don't believe. But it's so much. So they are killers. And when they are going to come back, it will be a big problem. And maybe that's why I consider that it's not responsible, it's not very clever to be idealistic at this time to concerning a law of anti-terroristic law, etc. Maybe we shall have, but we need to be very careful about how it's going to be applied and if freedom is really attacked by it.
Are there any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, I have one last question and we'll close off. A very simple one. When you speak of Dastur,
Yeah.
and the Dasturian politics, which seems to be a unique coming together of political ingredients in Tunisia. So you have the social emancipation, you have the Arabo-Muslim identity that is kind of trying to open itself up from within. Is Dastur a political formation? Is it a way of thinking that is exclusive to the political class, or is it spread among the people? Do different factions of Tunisian society associate themselves directly with Dastur?
No. When I talk about Dastur, I'm talking about the concept of seeking for modernity inside the Arabo-Islamic identity. And it's a way to say it very easily without saying all this each time. Because Dastur is the party that had been created by Bourguiba in 1934. And roughly, this idea has been concreted by Bourguiba during his period, in 56 to 87. So I say Dastur to say Bourguiba heritage and way of thinking that is had the phylogeny from this renewal of the 19th from the 19th century until today. So, but it's not very proper name for that. It's Dastur is political party, and it's
there is a politique d'Historienne and a pensée d'Historienne.
Yeah, when I call it pensée d'historienne because it's the closest word to define it. You see, because it comes from Tahar Hadid, Ben Ashur, which were all of them were members of the Dastur. But after that, Dastur become Hizb al-Dasturi de Bourguiba, that becomes an autocratic party and becomes paternalist and becomes dictatorship and becomes the party of Ben Ali later, the same party. So it's. But I prefer to talk about the concept, and it's the easiest way for me to define it is this. So today, the struggle is between the Islamists and the sons of Bourguiba, which I call them, and even the wing of the most at the left are today quite close to the Bourguiba's heritage, even if they were in jail in the 70s under Bourguiba today. And the problem is that the communists and the socialists have always lost the game in Tunisia because they have a problem with the identity, and that's why they're outside the game. They just have the intellectuals, the cafes, etc. They have their but in the deep country they do not have really a basis. So today they understood that, and some of them entered into Nida Tunis, and some of them stayed outside. But today even Hamal Hamami, which is Trotskyist, if he says I'm Arab and Muslim, but he says in the cultural way. But anyway, which means that there's no existence in the politics without being Arabic Muslim. So even Hammam, the poor Hammam Memi, today at 60 years old, he becomes Muslim. So that's the point.
Thank you very.
Sorry, modernity, doesn't that imply that religion has to become a private matter for every person?
Yeah, this is our point. But modernity still in the public place today. Okay, we can say it's my personal way of thinking. My wife goes to the beach in bikini. This is my personal freedom. And
also, like in the northern continent of Europe, we have a long time we have a separation of the state and religion.
yeah, this is not possible in Tunisia. Not possible. The people refuse it.
Yes.
And we lost the election of 2011 because of this idea.
I found this 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah.
I saw Bourguiba. I was
Yeah.
in a hotel where they
Yeah.
put the bomb.
Yeah.
I went to Sfaxa. I had
Yeah.
a friend who was engineering.
Yeah.
He was investing.
Yeah.
I went to Tunis. I met Mohammed.
Djerba, I saw the business, the money come, but I saw also the people, the poor people begging.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The distribution of the wealth is unfair.
In the hotels,
Unfair.
in the money, but Bourguiba always on the hands,
Mm.
and also under pressure
Mm.
of the people that was molestating.
Mm.
Like boys come from the country, from Faxa or from outside, and they want to go in the discotheques.
Yeah,
They don't allow it.
yeah, yeah,
And so when they molested
yeah,
me, like I came, foreign tourist, they went to jail.
yeah,
They couldn't drink. They
Yeah.
get one with one drink, they went to jail.
yeah.
So you had two different,
Mm.
like you said, the intellectual,
Mm.
the modern way,
Mm.
then you had the other parties
Yeah, yeah,
bring the money.
yeah.
That tourism was very, very
Mm.
common, because what you had in Tunis, it was the first for me, for all the Arabic
Mhm.
country. Tunis was first. 40 years ago,
Mm.
not even Morocco had this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The investment you
Yes,
had, the
yeah,
nicest hotels,
Yes,
and
yeah.
and the clothing, and was fantastic.
Mm.
But Bourguiba was really managing. And also the military, the police, the military
Yeah.
police, because
It was a political.
I was horse
political
riding.
success. Yeah.
So I went horse riding. I went also to Sfax, to the palace,
Yeah.
where the princesses came, and we
Yeah.
went horse riding. There's one story. And then understood your country.
Yeah.
It's easy. I was taking a horse from the palace.
Yeah.
And this horse was just, I took him to ride him around the beach. And the guy said to me, this horse just go only to there, and that's all. I say, it's not possible, because I ride horse. I can get this horse further than the place
Yeah.
he want
Yeah.
from the, let's say, from the hotel.
Yeah.
And we say 10 kilometers.
Mm.
What happened? I did it. I took the horse. I have a picture of it. I was young, beautiful. I took the horse. I was riding. I went in the sea. I went up. I went down. I went left. Suddenly the horse went with me. You rode the Arabic horse. You have fantastic horses. So you ride fast. And then suddenly he came on a point. The horse understand that he was going further. He turned, he threw me out, and he went back to the hotel. And so I
Discipline,
knew
discipline.
your people was like that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Moez. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday for the Malta
very
Mediterranean
much.
Literature Festival. Thank you.